Hello, and thank you for joining the Fall 2021 James Weldon Johnson Lecture Series. I'm Wayne Bowen, Interim Associate Dean and Director of Interdisciplinary Studies in the College of Undergraduate Studies. For the third consecutive year, our program is pleased to partner with Africana Studies and the History Department to host this lecture series honoring James Weldon Johnson. A key figure of the Harlem Renaissance, James Weldon Johnson was a man of many talents. Not only was he a distinguished lawyer and civil rights leader who served as executive director of NAACP for a decade, he was also a composer who wrote the lyrics for Lift Every Voice and Sing, often referred to as the Black National Anthem. Today's Lunch and Learn will be moderated by Asmara Cortes. Ms. Cortes is a graduate student in history at UCF. She is a recipient of the Graduate Studies Summer Mentoring Fellowship for Summer 2021, where she began researching her thesis topic of examining racial identity among Latinx groups during the Civil Rights Movement. Before pursuing her graduate studies, she completed her bachelor's in social science education at UCF in 2018 and taught high school for 2 years. Thank you for moderating, Asmara.
Lost Asmara, but hopefully she will be able to hop back in as we are continuing on. All righty, my name is Dr. Leah Gaines, and the title of my presentation is, if we could go to the next slide, please. The title of my presentation is in 1492, Columbus Sailed the Ocean Blue, Lost Communities, Study Away Initiatives, and Student Retention. Next slide, please. So just a few weeks ago, we celebrated Columbus Day. In the United States, this national holiday commemorates the founding of our great nation, totally disregarding the many communities and ethnic groups that had long existed in this new world before Columbus's arrival. Some states recognize this injustice and have renamed the holiday Indigenous Peoples Day. But for the majority of the country, Columbus Day still reigns. Actually, we continue our day-to-day lives without acknowledging the mass genocide, removal, and displacement of many Indigenous communities across the country. Our country is essentially made up on top of many lost communities. Next slide, please. Lost communities are communities of color that have been forcefully removed, displaced, or killed off by white groups. This includes those actions of angry mobs, local or federal government orders, military force, and even gentrification. These white removals of communities of color typically have racially, ethnically, economically, or socio-politically motivated means. Specific to African American communities, a widely known lost community is Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Black Wall Street. This example has been popularized in many documentaries, as well as many series such as the HBO series, The Watchmen. Here I have a quick clip that summarizes how The Watchmen incorporated the Tulsa Massacre into their mini-series. While the clip plays, please write in the chat if you've heard of Black Wall Street or share some information that you know of Black Wall Street.
I started reading the script and I got chills just thinking about the moment now, because I realized he was doing Black Wall Street.
In 1921, one of the few places in the United States where African Americans were really prospering was Tulsa, Oklahoma, as a result of the oil boom. And then over the course of 48 hours, that entire area was burned to the ground as a result of white supremacy and hatred.
It was very clear from Damon's vision of the show that he wanted to address one of the more pressing concerns of America right now, and that's racial tension.
Filming Tulsa 1921 was harrowing, but really profound experience. Everyone was so invested in order to pay respect.
It was our responsibility to be sensitive to the subject. We cannot further victimize this community.
The crew members still talk about the pastor that came and prayed over the set. There were a lot of people that never even heard of Black Wall Street.
When I was growing up, I didn't know anything about it. And it was one of the bloodiest massacres in American soil.
It just reminds you how much pain our country was built on that we haven't talked about. Pushing through that together was quite powerful.
clip discussed a dramatization of Black Wall Street, and I've provided a few pictures on the left that illustrate Tulsa following the riot or massacre. So at the top, we can see what Tulsa looked like following, immediately after, and then right below, the caption says "Captured Negroes on the way to Convention Hall," which essentially means this mass arrest of African-American men. Next slide, please. So outside of the more popular examples, such as Tulsa, Oklahoma, I'm very interested in bringing more awareness to lesser known communities, such as those of Lincolnville and the educational communities of New Orleans. The way that I'm proposing this initiative is through the high impact learning practices of 2 study away courses. The first will be in the spring of 2022 to the historic district of Lincolnville in St. Augustine, Florida, where students will take the course for the spring semester and study away during spring break. The second will be in the summer of 2022, where we would be headed to New Orleans, Louisiana. The students will be enrolled in a 6-week summer course and then study away in New Orleans for 3 to 4 weeks. Next slide, please. So Lincolnville is located here. On the map, you can see it circled on this map of St. Augustine. I also have a video, and we'll play this. It is a curator from the Lincolnville Museum, and she'll provide a brief overview about the rich history and culture of Lincolnville.
The road to Black history runs through Lincolnville. That's among the first things you'll see on the webpage for the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center.
Yeah, the African American History Museum is in St. Augustine and boasts a mission of preserving and promoting more than 450 years of the Black experience in America's oldest city.
That's a part of the historic character of this building. It was the Excelsior High School, which was the first high school for Blacks in St. Johns County, built back in the 1920s.
Gail Phillips is the executive director of this place, the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center. It radiates life and the stories you may or may not have heard about this corner of St. Augustine.
And for people who don't know what Lincolnville is, it was an area that was started after the Civil War, where you had U.S. colored troops returning to St. Augustine.
The museum starts with school history and has a room dedicated to the military.
And that's really one of my favorite photos here.
This one?
In the military section, because it shows these guys sitting down just having a beer together. And that was something that they couldn't have done that
not allowed,
earlier,
right?
You know.
Yeah.
And it would have still been very difficult to do at home.
There are artifacts and things from actual homes in Lincolnville during its heyday.
So what we tried to do here behind you, once you look at that, is to recreate from a photograph what a typical living room might have been like in the early 1920s in Lincolnville.
Phillips joyfully shared some of her favorites, and it's easy to get caught up in some of the joys. There's pride in this painting and who it represents.
His name was Dr. Daniel Roberts, and you know, as we were going through this pandemic of 2020 and 21, he was here during the pandemic of 1918, and he had the reputation of not losing any patients.
The final stops on our journey through the museum included the piece of these church windows.
These are 7 really historic churches in, not just in Lincolnville, but in St. Augustine.
And the rhythm of entertainment, the enjoyment of seeing the local connection to icons like Ray Charles.
What St. Augustine did for Ray Charles was he learned how to read Braille here. He learned how to read music here.
There are, however, images that mix the pain with the pride of persistence. Dr. Martin Luther King arrested in 1964. The Monson Motor Lodge with an attack on Black protesters in the pool. Success is part of the story, but it didn't come without struggle.
So if you talk to a lot of people who were here during the 60s, they will tell you that St. Augustine was pivotal in the signing of the Civil Rights Bill. I like to tell people civil rights movement didn't start in the 1960s. It didn't end in the 1960s. That's right. I mean, it still goes on to this day, you know.
And still going on. In this school, built for Black students in the 1920s, is an education for everyone. Lincolnville was born in 1866 by the free men and women that Gail Phillips spoke about. The museum's next event is in
The road to Black history runs through Lincolnville.
So here's what we know. Located in St. Augustine, Florida, the Lincolnville community is identified as a historically Black neighborhood. It was founded by free and freed African Americans after the Civil War. We know that it was historically a majority Black area, formerly known as Africa or Little Africa. However, according to US Census data, it was 42% white in the year 2000 and 75% white in 2014. Next slide, please. So with this information, I would like to offer the study away students with the following complex problems or complex questions. First, how did Lincolnville become a lost or forgotten community? What has happened to the Black residents of Lincolnville? And what can we expect to see of Lincolnville in the future? From an interdisciplinary perspective, students will be able to answer these questions and more by exploring urban planning, economics, history, African American studies, and other disciplines of study. Students will collect data through interviews, focus groups, conduct observations, as well as visit the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center. At the end of the course, students will display the information that they have collected via a research paper or multimedia video and make the findings available to both the Lincolnville and UCF communities. Next slide, please. A second lost community that has less attention are those educational communities of New Orleans, Louisiana. Hurricane Katrina was a devastating natural disaster that really impacted 4 communities of color in New Orleans. Here I have a short clip taken from a national telethon aimed at raising money for victims of Hurricane Katrina.
The shape of the city has changed dramatically, tragically, and perhaps irreversibly. There's now over 25 feet of water where there was once city streets and thriving neighborhoods.
I hate the way they portray us in the media. If you see a Black family, it says they're looting. See a white family, it says they're looking for food. And you know it's been 5 days because most of the people are Black. And even for me to complain about, I would be a hypocrite because I've tried to turn away from the TV because it's too hard to watch. I've even been shopping before even giving a donation. So now I'm calling my business manager right now to see what is the biggest amount I can give. And just to imagine if I was down there, and those are my people down there. So anybody out there that wants to do anything that we can help with the setup, the way America is set up to help the poor, the Black people, the less well off as slow as possible. I mean, Red Cross is doing everything they can. We already realize a lot of the people that could help are at war right now, fighting another way, and they've given them permission to go down and shoot us.
And subtle, but in even many ways more profoundly devastating, is the lasting damage to the survivors' will to rebuild and remain in the area. The destruction of the spirit of the people of southern Louisiana and Mississippi may end up being the most tragic loss of all.
George Bush doesn't care about Black people.
So as the clip is playing, I see that some people remember this. Maybe they remember watching it on TV as it was happening. But here we saw a clip of Kanye West expressing his frustration with the racialized response to Hurricane Katrina. To the left, I have 2 images. One at the bottom where it says, where are you, FEMA? So FEMA is a Homeland Security program that is supposed to respond to or provide relief for provide disaster relief. And I believe it was about a week or 2 where relief was actually sent to those victims of Hurricane Katrina. And then at the top, there's a picture of the Superdome, which we can see is very overcrowded, almost uninhabitable. And this is because this is where many victims fled for safety during the flood. But unfortunately, the Superdome was not housed for these types of conditions. So it became very overcrowded and very quickly. Next slide, please.
The shape of the city has changed dramatically.
So here's what we know. Hurricane Katrina was a natural disaster that hit the Gulf Coast in August of 2005. It largely impacted Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. This number is estimated and provided by the White House, so I'm also looking for other estimates as well. But there were about 1,330 Katrina-related deaths, 80% of whom came from New Orleans. Last, about 400,000 New Orleans were displaced, many of whom would never return to the city. What I would like to know more about and bring more awareness to are those educational communities that were displaced. So you can see the pictures on the right. The bottom was a school that was totally displaced by Hurricane Katrina. We see an abandoned school bus at the top. Next slide, please. The second study away will be to New Orleans, Louisiana during the summer of 2022. From a lens of pre and post Hurricane Katrina, I plan for the study away students to examine how Black educational communities within Louisiana have been impacted socially, politically, and economically. The complex problems and questions that I offer the study away students include: what was Hurricane Katrina and how were responses to it racialized? How did Hurricane Katrina impact African American educational communities? And what has since happened to the educational centers and institutions that once served African American students and communities? Students will be able to approach these interdisciplinary questions from multiple fields of study, such as education and African American studies. Before leaving for the 3 to 4 week study away, students will read multiple materials on the history of slavery and race in Louisiana, the contemporary state of education in schools in New Orleans, and other available literature. While on the trip, students will get the opportunity to visit historical sites such as Congo Square, the Whitney Plantation, Preservation Hall, and many other important local landmarks. Next slide, please. So here I've proposed 2 study away initiatives for the current academic year. I will also be leading study away courses in the upcoming academic years that will center Latinx and Indigenous communities. So next academic year, as well as the following academic year. Next slide, please. So what is the impact for students? Very important tools for education are high impact practices, such as the study away. According to Anderson et al. 2019, high impact learning can help undergraduates develop real world skills through hands-on applied learning. High impact learning practices have an overall positive effect on student learning and development, and such active and collaborative pedagogies can yield higher retention of first year, first generation, and underrepresented students. Next slide, please. At the end of all presentations, we do want to open the floor for discussion. I would also like to provide questions for the audience as well. So if you don't have a question for us, but would like to respond to one of these questions, the questions include: 1, where are some of the places that you have studied away or abroad to? Or where are some places that you hope to study away or abroad to? What are some of the things that you would hope to see from a study away or study abroad program? And what, if any, are some of the barriers that you have experienced when considering study away or study abroad? Next slide, please. I would just like to thank everyone for coming. I've provided my email on the screen. Please do feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Asmara Cortes, and I want to thank Dr. Bowen for introducing me. I was having some technical difficulties, which resulted in my computer freezing and pretty much me leaving the Zoom. So I do apologize for my late introduction, but thank you, Dr. Gaines, for going ahead and getting started with your presentation. I am very pleased to moderate today's Weldon, the Fall 2021 James Weldon Johnson Lecture Series, and the Africana Studies Program is proud to co-host today's Lunch and Learn. The Africana Studies minor is an interdisciplinary program that offers a course in a wide range of subject areas, such as African American Studies, Africana History, Film, Fine Arts, Latin American Studies, literature, political science, psychology, sociology, and anthropology. Africana Studies presents a unique opportunity for undergraduate students to explore the rich complexity and diversity of society. The program's interdisciplinary approach emphasizes the artistic and intellectual traditions of the Black experience. Today's Lunch and Learn focuses on the study away research, strategies for self-care, and careers in social justice, student opportunities in IDS research, and history, healing, and human rights. And it is designed with undergraduate students in mind. The session will be recorded, and by remaining in the Zoom meeting, you agree to the recording. The recording will be available on UCF History Department YouTube channel for later viewing. Joining us today is a panel of 3 speakers, each sharing their project experiences and insights on today's topic. We ask that you hold your questions until the Q&A portion, which will take place after all the panelists have presented. Our virtual panel is comprised of Dr. Leah Gaines, UCF Lecturer in Interdisciplinary Studies, Jasmine Harris, a UCF Senior minoring in Africana Studies, and Chelsea Baker-Taylor, a UCF Africana Studies Program alumna. We have already begun with Dr. Gaines, who joined the University of Central Florida in fall 2021 as a lecturer in interdisciplinary studies. She holds a PhD in African American and African Studies with a concentration in urban education from Michigan State University. Her research interests are in structural inequities, urban education, student experiences, African American language, Black women and beauty, race and identity. And her latest publication, In the Midst of the Water Crisis, Language and Resistance in Flint, is an ethnographic work which examines how educational community in Flint, Michigan has used language to resist the ongoing water crisis. Thank you, Dr. Gaines, for your engaging presentation on lost African American communities in St. Augustine, Florida, and in New Orleans, Louisiana. Up next, for our next presenter, we have Jasmine Harris, who will share strategies for self-care through the lens of Africana Studies, music and movement. Her strategies aim to help those of you who have lost your breath from oppression as we experience a racial pandemic. Ms. Harris is a senior at University of Central Florida, majoring in aquarial science with a double minor in Africana Studies and Statistics. She is a recent recipient of the Africana Studies and Business Dining Stipend and has a passion for Africana Studies. As an African American woman, she finds the coursework integral in building a healthy sense of identity and critical thinking. Ms. Harris, thank you for being on today's panel. And as a reminder, we will have a Q&A at the end of the session.
Hello, thank you for having me, Asmara. So, hello everyone. My name is Jasmine. After receiving my 200-hour Hatha Yoga teacher training certification, I began taking an interest in trauma-informed yoga through the lens of being an Africana Studies minor. Today, I will be guiding us through a brief history of the African diaspora, the culture and the resistance, and we'll talk about connecting the past to the present, and then we'll shine a light and talk about trauma and stress and close out with tools for self-care. But before we get started, I'd like to center everyone through a breathing pranayama exercise. If you were to take a yoga class, it is common for the instructor to begin the class by centering. So we are going to do a 3-part breathing exercise. I will demo it and instruct, and then we can begin. So I'm going to ask you all to either stand or be already seated, how you are probably in a desk chair or something of that nature. If you can just sit up tall, roll your shoulders back. You could place the palms of your hands on your thighs. You could have your arms folded. You can even place your hands on your belly if you'd like. So we're going to do a 3-part breathing exercise, and you're going to gently inhale through the nose. But as you inhale through the nose, you are going to fill the lungs up with air all the way to the top, allowing the rib cage to expand. And then we're going to pause and hold for 4 counts, which I will be counting us off. And then as you exhale, you're going to part the lips open. And this is the nuance that's very important. You're going to sigh it out. So you're going to inhale through the nose, hold, part the lips open, and gently sigh it out. So if you all could close your eyes, place your hands on your laps, and just check in with yourself and see how you are already breathing without changing anything. Sit up tall, elongate the spine through the crown of the head. Inhale through the nose for 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause, hold for 1, 2, 3, 4. Part the lips, sigh it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhale through the nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause, hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Part the lips open, sigh it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause, hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sigh it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause, hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale it out, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's our 3-part breathing. Next slide, please. So the Atlantic slave trade is the enslavement and forced migration of Africans between 1513 and 1850. It is considered one of the greatest human rights tragedies of human history. The international organization, the UN, United Nations, identifies crimes against humanity as the following physical elements if tried in the International Criminal Court of Law: murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation or forcible transfer of population, imprisonment, torture, grave forms of sexual violence, persecution, enforced disappearance of persons, the crime of apartheid, and other inhumane acts. When we look at the task of constructing colonial economies and societies, we must also look at cultural disruption and exploitation of African and indigenous populations. European explorers' way of life, such as domestication of animals, made them immune to certain microbial germs. However, contact with indigenous communities caused epidemic disease, resulting in a drastic decline of the Native American populations because they did not have the same immunity. This slowed the rate of European development and exploitation of newly conquered territories. Because of this shortage, Europeans turned to African slavery to supplement scarce indigenous labor and as a main source of labor. Thus, European-African relations centered on slavery, emerging a new caste system in the New World where being Black was the lowest rung. So slavery adapted to the needs of the particular region and the nature of the work being performed. This places value of a body on its ability to perform and produce work, contributing to a culture of an emerging capitalist system. So if we look at the map, we can see in the bottom left corner, there's a key. And some of the labor-intensive crops were tobacco, coffee, cotton, sugar, mining, and rice. Next slide, please. So I attended a West African dance festival called Dance Africa Miami, where I was able to take a variety of classes. I took an Afro-Cuban dance class where we were given a machete that's wooden, and we learned a dance for the Orisha Ogun. Marisol, the dance teacher, says, these are dances that derive from Africans working in the sugarcane fields. She explains that the idea is that we are strong people. Anything that gets in our way, we cut it down with our machete. All of our movements have meaning. And you can play the video in the lower right corner in minimized view.
All our movements have meaning, always. Always. Without meaning, we don't move. Mm-hmm. Yeah? Can I get one? Yeah, of course.
And in the next video, which is in the center, you can hear us calling out Ogun's name to the specific rhythm of the drum is for this specific Orisha name, Ogun. So if you could play the video in the center in full screen, please. So Africans and their descendants attempted to practice their culture, but many men and women accommodated or adapted to the emerging societies in America that deprived them of their links to their ancestral home. A component of African spiritual tradition is not to personify God as a single entity, but seeks to describe the vastness of this idea by focusing on particular attributes of the natural world as different aspects of the creative force, or supreme creator, or God, or immanent force in which life creation began. Therefore, nature is highly regarded because it sustains human life and reflects a dwelling intelligence that shows awareness of when and how the seasons change, how planets align, how tidal waves are affected, and even the human body, and knowingly manages these dynamic interrelationships. Africans used anthropomorphic symbols such as the orishas. Anthropomorphism is the use of a person, animal, plant, bird, or fish to represent a concept, idea, or principle. So for example, when we talk about the Orisha Yemoja, which is the mother of our being, or Olokun, the father, they are both used to represent the ocean. However, Olokun is that part of the water where photosynthesis does not take place, which is deep in the ocean, and Yemoja is part of the water where photosynthesis does take place. Their understanding of how nature works allows them to create what the West call deities, but known as orishas in African traditions. The idea is that we use these forces to animate within our own self and affect change in our beliefs, behaviors, and attitudes, and changes in the body. If you can play the video to the left side of the screen in full view, please. So the picture that you see in the center here, it's of enslaved Haitians gathered one night in August 1791. If you look closely, you can see they have machetes in their hands. It was said a ritual was performed that invoked them with the courage that they rose up and put fear into the hearts of slave owners, leading to the Haitian Revolution that abolished slavery in Haiti. Next slide, please. I was also able to take a Congolese class with Fumalayo. Congolese dancing has influenced the musical culture of many styles, from samba, hip hop, reggae, even to Michael Jackson's moonwalk. Congolese dance is a healing dance that Fumalayo refers to as a medicine dance, movements for healing the womb and prostate through music, vibrations, and pelvic rotations. You can play the video in the minimized view it's in already. So enslaved Africans' use of their traditions of dance, drum, ritual, whether practiced in the open, secretly, or even hiding in plain sight, became tools for liberation. It is a political act of resistance because it allowed autonomy of one's body, a form of self-governance through using the body as an instrument with dance and drum to connect, receive spiritual guidance, and healing effects from drum vibrations. All of this challenges and disrupts the institution of slavery because you are taking back your mind and body. Unfortunately, in the West, these practices are viewed through a white colonial gaze and get stigmatized as demonic or witchcraft, when it is a sophisticated divination system relying on nature, physics, astronomy, mathematics, and more, and should be highly respected. Next slide, please. So the awakening of the racial pandemic, we saw a few things. We saw riots happening following the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. We saw Asians being stereotyped and shunned because of the virus. Also bombarding images of Black bodies being abused all over social media. And I also saw on social media the lack of understanding for Black Lives Matters in context with All Lives Matters. And that made me very kind of sad to see the lack of understanding amongst people on social media. And I thought, well, maybe if I took the time to explain the history, like people will understand where we're coming from, maybe they just don't know. But I found myself getting cross-examined and that what I was saying wasn't true and that my experiences were invalid. And these interactions left me extremely drained. We are all not seeing and responding to the same thing. Each of us is perceiving reality through our own unique lens, influenced by our beliefs, values, race, ethnicity, culture, and life experiences. You could play the video on the screen in full-size view, please. So Dr. Joy DeGruy, author of Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, describes how slavery produced centuries of physical, psychological, and emotional injury after the fact. Her work describes attitudes, behaviors, and reactions passed down from one generation to the next associated with intergenerational race-based stress and trauma. Resmaa Menakem, a psychotherapist and trauma specialist, states that racial attitudes are not just conceptual, but are deep-seated bodily responses to unhealed trauma. He describes the trauma that Europeans endured during the Middle Ages when powerful white bodies tortured less powerful white bodies for hundreds of years. He traces how the trauma of these experiences are passed down from one generation to the next. One result he refers to as white body supremacy, a response to unhealed intergenerational and historical trauma that elevates white bodies over others. He suggests that the white ethnic and racial anexphobia, insensitivity, cruelty, oblivion, indifference, and harm are caused by unhealed traumatic retention. Oppression takes the breath away, and trauma is gut-wrenching experiences. Next slide, please. Racial stress is defined by a cumulative experience that is often magnified by the lack of opportunity to recover before the next experience, causing it to become chronic. There are three forms of racial injury, such as discriminatory practices, hostile forms of harassment, and discriminatory harassment. A popular response amongst most people of color to racial injuries is high-effort coping. High-effort coping is a behavioral style that those who are locked out of opportunities due to racial and ethnic discrimination tend to utilize to gain access and to prove their worth. So if you ever heard someone say, if you're a Black man, you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. And if you're a Black woman, you have to work 3 times as harder. That's an example of high-effort coping. Next slide, please. So here is a list of a few self-care tips for navigating within a racialized culture. On this list, one of my favorites would be starting an at-home yoga practice. The combined pressure of the psychological stresses associated with living in a racialized culture, feeling unsafe, and living on the edge of constant fear, along with doing the hard work of trying to overcome barriers to success and equality, leaves one vulnerable to stress-related illnesses. An at-home yoga practice with the emphasis on pranayama, which is breath work. And if you see here, prana stands for life force, ayama is extended. With an emphasis on breath work, like what we did today in the beginning of the presentation, can greatly benefit you because prana fuels our physical actions and sensual perceptions, thoughts, and emotions. When we expend energy in indecision, fear, doubt, impatience, and emotionally draining ways, we lose a tremendous amount of life force. And oppression takes the breath away, and yoga can help you find your breath. These practices can help support repair, rejuvenation, and resilience by training the nervous system to feel safe coming into deep states of rest. Next slide, please. We hurt others as a result of ignorance and our own inner strife and pain. Racial wounding hides in the shadow. It is insidious. Maintaining a culture of silence regarding ethnicity and race makes it difficult to end the cycle. So I would like to invite everyone to start their healing journey through the process of self-study by examining how your own racial, ethnic, and cultural contexts and how your place in history influence your experiences and perceptions of race, ethnicity, stress, and trauma. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Harris. That was a very insightful presentation. Moving on, we have our final panelist, which is Mrs. Chelsea Baker-Taylor. So Mrs. Chelsea Baker-Taylor is an entrepreneur, board member, and professional activist. Graduating with her BA from UCF in Interdisciplinary Studies and a minor in Africana Studies, her areas of focus was in arts and communication while she was an undergraduate. Currently, she is an NAACP Education Board member and a member of the Equity Council Cooperation Board. She is also the managing director and co-founder of Orlando Youth in Action Movement. She is also the owner of Fairy P LLC. Ms. Baker-Taylor will address postgraduate career possibilities for the Africana Studies minor, and she will share her experience in community activism with you all today.
Thank you for that introduction. I am Chelsea Fairy, pronouns she, her, they, Fairy. Next slide. A former political canvasser and 2020 graduate of UCF, of course, with a minor in Africana Studies, and a former history department intern for Bridge the Gap Coalition, which of course led me onto the board of their partner organization, Equity Council Corporation. So I transformed from a student to a professional activist. And as an activist, I now manage the Orlando Youth in Action Movement. Now we're empowered to bring tangible change to Black and Brown youth in Orlando, created directly after the 2020 George Floyd Breonna Taylor protest. Next slide. The youth and some organizations came together and organized our peaceful efforts into an action plan energized by the 13th Amendment that was shared to the city of Orlando on public record. This 13-point action plan petition amassed over 1,000 homegrown signatures, which is really crazy for somebody just starting out. Next slide. Taking such momentum, we forged a bill from one of our points. We also worked on many campaigns involving historic communities, such as Winter Park's single-member district, and a fight for a school in Hannibal Square. But none of this would have been possible without my bond created from the UCF internship and my partnership with the Equity Council every step of the way. Next slide. Now, before I go any further, I must be frank and say, what is activism? Pretty sure you heard of it before. And if I could ask the audience in the chat, like, what do you think activism is, or do you claim yourself to be an activist? I'll try to look out for that. But activism for me is the revolutionary act of dissenting away from the norm. To dissent from the norm is to express or question what has been normalized throughout modernity, such as white supremacy and its wages of whiteness, as David Roediger puts it. Throughout history, we see activism as a revolution away from what is constantly and currently oppressing those not captured in it. Carrying this major, it becomes important to realize even institutions have normalized a fragmented history to preserve white supremacy and erase everything outside of it as electives or higher learnings or a minor degree. To be an activist, it is to dissent the normal behaviors of erasure, to decolonize your mind, body, and spirit. It is that simple to start, which means you can start anywhere at any time. And now we know time can be used as a tool in white supremacy that is used against us as reason not to dissent. But that's a whole nother conversation that Orlando Youth in Action spoke and can be found on Instagram or Facebook. I want to ask in the audience, how do you think time can be used against you? Yeah, because we know schoolwork is one, the deadlines is heavy, right? Next slide. Now that I explained activism, what does it mean to do it professionally? Does it go against it? No. Now, because I stated that time is used against us, we all have to work or go to school or do both, if you were like myself, in order to survive in the supremacist institutions and systems we all live in today. To be a professional activist is to choose your economic income while being an activist and community organizer. So that's things like, grant writing, working with small or local businesses, contracted work, or canvassing for larger organizations or campaigns. A community organizer is someone who's willing to lead in the community. That's simple. Someone who's willing to question or dissent the inequities of all oppressed, or as Dr. Gaines puts it, lost communities. Starting with the one you currently live in. Now, for example, my roommate and I did so with the Project Cree's Community Breakfast, with the help of community resources such as Blue Trunk Garden, Equity Council, to of course feed the students and the elders of our community throughout the pandemic. Because we know breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and most of the students were missing which the school would provide, which is their breakfast. Next slide. Now, I didn't always end up there. I've actually moved to Orlando about 6 years ago from South Florida, where I came with the intention of not only finishing my degree, but making change in the communities around me while I studied up here. Now, that took a lot of decolonization of my own thoughts before I could truly just walk into that revolutionary path. Now, what is decolonization? I said it a couple times. If you've never heard of that term, it simply means to unlearn what society has taught you, or undoing colonialism. I want to ask in the chat, because I do see you guys were pretty active as far as what activism means to you, which is great. What decolonization may mean to you, or if there's any subscribed thoughts that you had that you want to undo. I'll go ahead and provide one that we all probably follow. A normalized societal thought is, of course, to go to college, get a degree, get out of college and get a nice job, create a family that will hopefully do it all over again. Now, even if that's just an ideal, it's something that we all subscribe to in one way or another. But we know that in reality, that's not always the outcome, especially after the 2020 pandemic or panoramic pizza or whatever we want to call it, okay? Now, this means we have to unlearn some of those beliefs that were limiting how we actually and actively create change. Next slide. So how do you decolonize your mind? Of course, you can write some ways that you may decolonize your mind. I know that Jasmine has provided some earlier, but what do you think when you hear about decolonizing your mind? Ways to start that I'll say is supporting disenfranchised folks by offering help, taking classes to learn history taught by Black, Indigenous people of color, because that's really important. Getting into your own shadow or spirit work, such as Jasmine mentioning pranamaya, breath work. We know what we're saying. You got to breathe, girl. And Orisha, taking free classes at the public library or with organizations to advance knowledge and network with diverse, like-minded people, or just being willing to ask questions in seemingly normal settings, like the classroom. That's how you start. I mean, honestly, that's what I did. I simply reached out to professors. I know you'll be surprised how much information they have or they're willing to help provide outside of the classroom. Next slide. Now, I talked about how I'm on the board for the Equity Council and how my internship moved me into these networks. I said, who is the Equity Council though? I did meet them through the Bridge the Gap internship. And when I started, I was paired with the Equity Council because of the projects I was working on at school surrounding the LEAD program and of course, research papers. Their missions, of course, related to mine, which helped me decolonize myself while working on my internship and going to school, you know, creating some balance. Equity Council's work from creating youth programs, working on the July Perry marker for Ocoee Massacre, being the former SAC president, and their fight for a school in the historic Black community align with my career mission, ideals, and believe it or not, this is a crucial step in decolonization of your own professional activism journey. Just questioning information or resources that are normally available or provided in the workplace, school place, or community spaces seems little, but it is the little things that make the larger operate smoothly. Next slide. Most people would not know what to do with the history internship because Lord knows I did not know what to do. Because there isn't much room for jobs in like the ideal corporate structure that includes our degree type or the experience, unless you want to be like an educator, you know, then that made sense. But when I started this internship, I wasn't quite sure on how it would play out, but I did know it aligned with what my intention was and is, which is helping out communities in need. So I started asking questions like, what are the needs of the community I live in now? Is my school even meeting these needs with their resources? What indigenous communities are right around me? Is this community gentrified? Does my community reflect the normal American lifestyle? And like, how did that happen? I took these questions and my intentions and allowed that to be my drive, even in unfamiliar territory, which is essentially activism. Seeing a need and demanding the needs are met. And this is what the Equity Council did, of course, to get started as well, and what you can do to start. Next slide. Through this partnership in my internship, I was able to see that you can take a researched idea and make it tangible without large funding or large media attention. Together, we formed a proposal for culturally relevant pedagogy training, which was pivotal in the creation of the 13-point action agenda petition and in our new youth business program starting in the spring semester. Other projects that came from my internship connection is, of course, understanding how important gentrified, lost communities are to disenfranchised peoples, which is why fights such as the K-8 school and the historic district for Winter Park is so important. Because through the gentrified normal communities, we find that there was a lot of hidden first in the communities that were stolen or lost from Black and Brown Indigenous folk. Now it is up to us to question the supposed normal and teach the youth how to redefine success through community activism and economic empowerment in the way that we are not normally indoctrinated. I mean, hello, look at me, I'm on the board. You see us, we look cute. Next slide. Now, even if you don't have the money to start your own project, like we did with Cree's Community Breakfast or Equity Council's Kwanzaa celebration, but it could be something starting small, like a blessing bag. This is something I did when I served as the president for African Student Union at my former institution. And we took toiletries, feminine products, you know, things that I might have had currently in excess and gave that into people in need. Of course, you can reach out to cultural enrichment centers, such as like Hannibal Square, finding out any nonprofit organizations that are currently doing the work around you in your area so you can get involved. But you have to start somewhere. I mean, none of it would have been possible if I didn't put myself out there for this internship while going to school. And of course, trying to remain focused on my intention to succeed despite oppression wanting to see me fail. Now, you must actively stay involved by, of course, like signing petitions, giving monetary donations to boots on the ground, joining nonprofit research teams. Oh, yeah. Being willing to make calls for campaigns or physically show up for things that don't get normalized attention. Now, it's not always easy, but that's where finding balance is key. That's why it's crucial to stay involved and to call yourself an activist. You have to choose what's important, even when it seems unmanageable. We know what's normal is getting lost in the schoolwork, our work, social life, time, or anything else unbalanced. Like literally not having the time to just do anything else that matters to you because you're given so much in what it means to be successful by doing like schoolwork. I get it. But what's been normalized, romanticized, and pacified throughout history is the ideal of success, starting with the white American middle class family, white supremacy or toxicity, and its institutions that uphold its values. We must actively choose to work against those beliefs that are normal, as it probably aids in upholding violent, archaic values. Keeping focus on how we can resist normativity and white supremacy by asking questions that will lead to action. Supporting disenfranchised, oppressed, and weird biopic folk is definitely a start, but it wouldn't be right if I didn't give you guys any resources on where to go. Next slide. Of course, you can start with the Equity Council, which they created a Soku Marketplace, which is a weekly Black-owned market space to help Black business owners gain economic freedom towards brick and mortar spaces. Now, they use their funds from this market space to continue to give back to their community. So, of course, you can donate to their Give Back program by going to Cash App and sending the funds. I mean, what's not clicking, Stephen? For my TikTok watchers, okay? Send it 200. That's not. Now, if you want to show up physically and help the community work and be a leader, not just monetarily, you can join our volunteer canvas for the historic fight for a school. Now, of course, you got to keep going in activism work because there's so many ways that they'll try to put you down. So with this fight, this is, of course, combat OCPS and continue to put the work in for a school in that community. Please join these efforts by, of course, signing the link. Now, I'm going to post it in the chat. Y'all let me know if you got it, if it worked, anything, et cetera, et cetera. Boom. There is the link. And next slide, you'll be able to see the form on the link will show you just a little background as to what this fight was about, where we are now, and how we're moving forward. Of course, light refreshments and snacks and any other light incentives to get involved, we will please provide. But sign up and join these efforts. Now, if continuing education is your stick, next slide. You can, of course, just learn to be a better activist at any level with Blue Trunk Garden's Conflict Resolution Workshop Series. Now, we do accommodate a sliding scale for Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ+ students, leaders, and organizers. You can always email Blue Trunk at info@bluetrunk.org. And lastly, I can't talk about professionalizing activism if we're not talking about internship careers and opportunities to make money. Now, you can start to professionalize your activism by starting with a business internship or contracted work for a Black family-owned financial services business. KDEX Financial helps individuals, families, and businesses plan, save, and protect their finances and provide a transfer of wealth to their beneficiaries without avoiding the most dreadful probate processes. Now, the interns and contracted workers will have duties as such on the screen, mostly administrative work, but still great stuff to get involved with because you get to learn the business and the lingo and still be involved in activism. But you can go to the next slide. You can always just reach out and follow Orlando Youth in Action for more information and, of course, how to professionalize your activism. You see us on Facebook as well as Instagram. And worst case scenario, you can send me an email. I know y'all used to it with meeting deadlines. So just reach out and send me an email. It is orlandoyoutinaction@gmail.com. But I do want to say, for those who are willing to get involved, please continue to use your voice and continue to dissent from the norm. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Chelsea Baker Taylor. That was a very insightful presentation. So this concludes our panel presentation, and we are now going to open the floor to any questions that you might have. So please place your questions in the chat, and I will pose your questions to the panel. There are also some questions that Dr. Gaines proposed earlier in her presentation that are some questions that she has for you all as well, such as what were some of the places that you've studied away or abroad to, or what were some places that you hope to study away or abroad to? What are some of the things you would hope to see from a study away abroad program? Or what, if any, some of the barriers you've experienced when considering study away abroad? I do see a question for Dr. Gaines here. So how long will students be in each city? And also, can online students take the summer semester to New Orleans?
Yes, so the spring study away to Lincolnville will be, so the class is for the full semester, but the study away will be in Lincolnville for about a week, and that will be during spring break. So during the summer, the study away to New Orleans will be held during the summer A, and that is about a 6-week course, but we will be in New Orleans for about 3 to 4 of those 6 weeks. Did I answer all questions there?
And can online students take the summer semester to New Orleans?
Yes. So we are currently working on the format in terms of, while we're not studying away, do we want this to be a hybrid course? Do we want this to be a course that can meet online? Right now, the answer is yes, but please do email me because here's the reason why I asked some of the questions as well about the study away, is because I want to know the barriers that students are experiencing so that we can make the study away more accessible to students. So one of the major drives for the study away program is because we understand that study abroad programs, so typically study abroad means traveling internationally outside of the country. A lot of students do not have access to study abroad. Meaning whether it is for financial reasons. So maybe they don't have the money to leave the country, the resources to leave the country, or maybe they just cannot leave the country. So maybe the student comes from a family that is undocumented, or maybe the student is an international student that doesn't have permission to study abroad while being a student in the United States. So we wanted to find ways to make studying away more accessible. And a way that we thought of doing this is studying domestically in the United States. The first one we thought of Lincolnville, because even some students in Florida, maybe they live in Orlando, maybe they live in Miami, but maybe they've never been to St. Augustine. So we wanted to pick places that are accessible, and we are trying our best to make this an affordable experience as well.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? I'm seeing lots of comments on the wonderful presentations. Oh, another question for Jasmine. So do we have any of those dance classes that you attended in Miami here locally that you know about?
Right now in Orlando, I do think there was a group that was hosting classes at one point in time, but I don't think so anymore. Even being here a UCF student, when I moved here, I was in search of West African dance classes that I could attend, and I didn't really have any luck, but I usually attend these conferences. So what I attended was a conference. So it's hard to find weekly classes, but there are conferences that are held like annually, where it'll be like 3 days of dancing, and I get my fix for the year just doing that. But I don't think there are any going on right now, especially with the pandemic. I know a lot of the local classes that were happening at one point kind of put it on pause.
Well, I actually have a question for Chelsea. So you talked about your internship. I wanted to know, like, how did you find your internship?
Okay. That's a pretty great and simple question. I literally reached out. They did an email blast, and I just like reached out to my professors in the Africana program, and I was like, hey, what is this about? And the information became like flooded to me, because sometimes us as students, like, we don't jump on or ask questions or do some of the work because we're so overwhelmed with like turning in our projects and doing school, but we forget that life still goes on outside of it. So I tried to do the due diligence of, let me reach out and see what's going on, because some people need like internship majors. I'm not sure if anyone needs the credit. If you need credits for it, yeah, like you have to go out and look for it. But I just was already actively doing internships. So I reached out, and Dr. Gordon was very pivotal in me getting into this internship. So they're willing to help you if you're willing to put yourself out there.
All right. I also came up with a question for Dr. Gaines as well. So you mentioned in the future that there are future plans for study aways for Latinx and Indigenous communities. Do you have any idea as to those plans in the future, like where you would want to go or study away to?
Yes, so we've been spending most of the time planning for the upcoming ones, but ideas have been for the Latinx communities, California, and then the Indigenous communities is, so I've been speaking to one of my colleagues in the department, and we've been trying to think of ways to incorporate Canada. This is not written in stone yet, but that might also be a possibility, but it's not written in stone yet. So these ideas are just ideas right now, but we're more so focused on the New Orleans and Lincolnville right now, for sure.
Awesome. Are there any other questions that anyone from the audience would like to ask for the panel?
Asmara, could I ask a question to the audience?
Sure, feel free.
Do any of you have any self-care tips that you like to share that you already have in place that you like to do? You can leave those in the chat. I'd like to see. I see someone said they like to take baths and cook their favorite meal. Someone teaches yoga as well, stretching before bed.
If I may chime in, because I see the yoga and stuff, with the Soku Marketplace, like I was telling you guys, it's a weekly business space to support Black and ethnic-owned businesses. But there's also free yoga taught by Black instructors. That's also in the morning available. This is from 8 to 1. So really cool if you like to stretch and give yourself a different type of self-care. That is one way you can do so in the historic community of Hannibal Square. And again, this is every Saturday. So I would love to see some of you guys coming out and stretching with us, maybe breathing, maybe having Jasmine out there breathing. We would love to encourage it.
I'm seeing some wonderful self-care strategies. I see, Ms. Thompson, you have your hand raised. If you'd like, you can unmute if you'd like to ask a question.
I didn't have a question as of yet, but I did just want to say that you ladies did a wonderful job, like for real. And it was awesome research. I really learned a lot of things that even I, as a current activist and a current business owner that runs an activist agency, learn from you guys. You're definitely on such a great path for our future activists, because it's kind of one of those things where, you know, as you mature, you know, there is a little burnout that comes in with doing activist work. And so it is important that our youth are preparing themselves to take the torch and carry that work on. So I just want to applaud you all for just showcasing that, gosh, just awesome material. And I can't wait to see the work you all do in the future. Blessings.
Thank you so much for your lovely comments. I agree, the panel did such a wonderful job with their presentations today. And I'm seeing quite a few self-care suggestions in the chat going on. I'm loving the beach watching, walking, dancing, reading.
And LaWanda, I find it very interesting that you mentioned about the activist work and how it can be tiring and it is hard work. So yoga and things such as doing breath work and really taking care of yourself can help support repair, rejuvenation, so you can get up the next day and keep going and not feel too discouraged against all of the stuff going on.
Well, if there aren't any other questions or anything to ask the panel, I would like to conclude with our closing remarks. So on behalf of the UCF Africana Studies Program, the UCF Interdisciplinary Studies, the College of Undergraduate Studies, and the Student Learning and Academic Success, we would like to thank our panel for participating in today's Lunch and Learn. I also extend a thank you to our audience for joining us, and we hope that you found this information insightful. Again, the lecture is being recorded and will be available on the UCF History Department's YouTube channel. So thank you for tuning in, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.